They thought if they studied you long enough, they could predict your every move. They believed that if they could chart your silence, they could control your storm. They were wrong. They whispered your name in rooms you were never invited to. You became the subject of their secret meetings, their private fears, their hushed laughter. Not because they admired you, no, because deep down, they knew something about you terrified them. You were not born like them. You didn't seek validation, applause, or approval. You didn't beg to be seen. You forced the world to look at you. They tried to dissect that. You were a puzzle they couldn't solve, a fire they couldn't touch without getting burned. They watched from behind their glass walls, taking notes like scientists, studying a beast they could never tame. Every step you took, every silence you kept, recorded, analyzed, misunderstood. They called it curiosity. But you knew the truth. It wasn't curiosity. It was fear. Fear wearing a lab coat. Fear pretending to be fascination. They said, let's understand him. But what they meant was, let's figure out how to stop him. Because they saw what was coming. And they knew. When the time came, you wouldn't need their permission to rise. Every glance they threw at you was a calculation. Every handshake was a test. Every question, an experiment to measure your breaking point. But you didn't break. You evolved. You learned to see through their smiles, through the performance of their concern. You realized that their compliments were disguised inspections. Their friendship, just another form of surveillance. They didn't want to know who you were. They wanted to know how you worked, how you kept surviving when others collapsed, how your silence was louder than their noise. And yet, in their obsession to study you, they revealed everything about themselves, their jealousy, their weakness, their hunger for control. They wanted to contain you like a specimen trapped under glass. But how do you contain something that was never meant to be contained? They observed your rise the way men watch fire. From a safe distance, fascinated but terrified. They hoped you'd burn out on your own. They prayed the flames would eat themselves before touching their fragile empires. But the thing about fire is that it learns to leap. You became unpredictable. Your silence became a threat. Your endurance, an equation they couldn't solve. The same people who once claimed to understand you started to whisper, he's changing. He's dangerous now. He's different. They didn't realize that's the point. You were never meant to stay understandable. You were meant to evolve beyond their comprehension. They watched you bleed, yet couldn't explain why you still stood. They saw you lose everything, yet couldn't comprehend why your eyes still burned with purpose. They called you broken, but in your cracks, you built empires. And so, the observers became the fearful. The watchers became the watched. Because while they were busy studying you were studying them too. You memorized their fears. You saw through their hierarchy of cowardice. You learned what they worshipped: comfort, safety, reputation, and you weaponized it. Every insult became intelligence. Every betrayal, data. Every silence, evidence. They thought you were quiet because you were weak. You were quiet because you were recording everything. Every smirk, every lie, every attempt to measure your worth. You stored it like ammunition. And when the time came, You knew exactly who they were. You knew exactly what they feared, and you became everything they couldn't destroy. Now when they speak your name, their voices lower, because the one they studied became the storm they feared. Let them keep their notes. Let them keep their theories. Let them drown in their own conclusions. You don't exist on paper anymore. You exist in legend. They studied you. They feared you. And in their desperate attempt to understand you, they built the monster that now stands before them. They didn't just study you. They tested you. They wanted to see how much pain it would take before you shattered, how many betrayals it would take before you broke. They called it character development. But it was never about building you. It was about breaking you. They set traps and called them opportunities. They smiled while handing you poisoned offers wrapped in promises. They told you to trust them, knowing the knife was already in your back. And when you finally fell silent, they mistook it for defeat. But silence was never surrender. It was calculation. They threw stones wrapped in advice. Every, maybe it's not for you. Every, be realistic. Every fake smile that said, we're proud of you, while their eyes screamed, we hope you fail. They smiled while cutting the wires inside your spirit, hoping you'd never roar again, hoping the machine within you would finally shut down. But you learned pain like a language. You mastered it until it obeyed you. You became fluent in suffering. You could translate betrayal into fuel, disappointment into discipline, loss into legend. You learned that pain doesn't destroy. It refines, it sharpens, it burns away the weakness they depended on. Every scar became a signature, every wound a prophecy. They thought they were taming you. They were forging you. They said you were too cold, too quiet, too ruthless, good. Because warmth never built empires, silence never lied, and ruthlessness, that was just your version of honesty. They tried to train you to bow, to smile while bleeding, to accept less, speak less, be less. They called it humility, but it was obedience disguised as virtue. And you were never meant to obey. You were meant to lead, to dominate, to become the echo that drowns out their noise. They designed the cage carefully. They built it with words, with fear, with systems meant to make you doubt your own pulse. They said, stay here, stay safe. But safety was just another word for submission. Their greatest mistake, believing that control could cage conviction. You were never a soldier of their order. You were a storm, waiting for permission to strike. They tried to teach you patience, but patience was your weapon, not your weakness. While they plotted, you prepared. While they watched, you evolved. While they laughed, you sharpened every fracture inside you into a blade. And when the day came, you didn't rise politely. You erupted. You shattered their glass reality that and their control system failed before they realized what they'd created. You were their greatest experiment and their most catastrophic result. Because they feared what you could do when unchained. So they built the chain themselves. Every rule, every boundary, every whisper of know your place. But all they did was show you where the exits were. They believed they could define you by pressure. They forgot diamonds are made the same way. They wanted to measure your pain. They ended up measuring your patience. They wanted to break your rhythm. They ended up teaching you timing. You didn't escape their control. You outgrew it. You expanded beyond the limits of their understanding. You became too vast for their systems to quantify. They will say, you changed. No. You remembered who you were before they tried to rewrite you. The same fire they feared became the only light left in their darkness. The same silence they mocked became the sound of your strategy. The same scars they pointed at became the map of your survival. You don't hate them. You don't need to. You've surpassed them. Because now they look at you and see everything they tried to destroy. Still standing, still breathing, still burning. You are not what they made. You are what survived what they made. They thought they were building a slave. They created a sovereign. They thought they were testing your limits. They discovered you had none. Their failure was not that they tried to control you. It's that they believed control could ever exist in the presence of will. And now, when they whisper about you, it's not with mockery, it's with caution, because somewhere in their hearts, they know. The next time they try to cage something like you, it will be the last thing they ever do. They watched you for years. They took notes. They built files thicker than their courage. Every detail of your life was their study material. Your mistakes, your silence, your scars. They thought they had you mapped. They thought they had you understood. Until the moment you opened your eyes and realized who was really in control. You began to see through their masks. Through the cracks in their confidence, through the trembling hands that pretended to point but only shook. They feared you but hid it behind laughter. They envied you but dressed it as criticism. They wanted your fire but cursed the heat. And one day, something inside you shifted. You stopped defending yourself. You stopped explaining your silence. You stopped caring about what they said or who they sent, because you realized the cage was never locked. You were just polite enough not to break it. They thought you were still being watched. They didn't know the hunter had already switched positions. You studied their behavior, the tone they used when they lied, the way they avoided your eyes when you started seeing too clearly. You noticed the rhythm of their manipulation, the pauses, the patterns, the panic. They taught you the anatomy of deceit, and you became its surgeon. Fear used to chase you. Now it followed them. You no longer ran from the shadows. You commanded them. You no longer begged to be understood. You used misunderstanding as a weapon. Every doubt they threw at you became camouflage. Every insult, a signal flare showing you where they stood. And then, you smiled because you finally understood. They never feared your rage. They feared your control. They feared the moment you learned to aim the storm instead of running from it. The moment you realized the hunter's greatest weapon is patience. You became surgical. You struck where it hurt most, their certainty. You dismantled their narratives with silence. You tore their illusions apart with your calm. You didn't need to raise your voice. You simply stood your ground, and the world around them began to tremble. Every time they whispered about you, you were already 5 moves ahead. Every time they planned your failure, you were already using their plan as fuel. They tried to measure you in moments, but you existed in eras. You became what they never accounted for: evolution. You were no longer the subject. You became the storm that entered their lens. They wanted to study your pain, but your silence became data they couldn't decode. They wanted to record your downfall, but their cameras shattered the moment you rose. You became unpredictable, and unpredictability is the death of control. You stopped being the experiment. You became the consequence. You moved differently, spoke differently, walked through the world like someone who knew exactly what hell looked like, and no longer feared its fire. They didn't understand how you kept coming back stronger, how every failure looked like training, how every scar looked like armor. They called it obsession. They called it madness. They called it luck. But deep down, they knew. It was something else. It was clarity. When you lose everything, you stop pretending. When you've been through every storm, you stop fearing the rain. And when you've been hunted long enough, you start hearing footsteps before they even begin. That's what they never realized. They thought they were building a profile. You were building a strategy. They thought they were analyzing you. You were memorizing their tactics. They thought they could predict your next move. You taught yourself to have no pattern. That's when you became untouchable, because you weren't reacting anymore. You were orchestrating. You weren't a character in their game. You were the player rewriting the rules. They sent words. You sent silence. They sent armies. You sent time. They burned bridges. You built kingdoms from the ashes. You became what all tyrants fear. The one they can't control. The one they can't predict. The one who no longer plays their game. And the beauty of it, you didn't need revenge. You didn't need their recognitions. You became something far more terrifying. Indifferent. Because indifference is the final form of power. When their names no longer matter, when their opinions sound like echoes in a graveyard, when their fear becomes the only proof they ever existed, you no longer chased validation. You became its source. You no longer begged for peace. You weaponized chaos. You no longer waited for light. You became the storm that blinds it. They once watched you like prey. Now they move carefully, afraid to awaken what they buried. You walk among them like a ghost made of fire. Silent, cold, unstoppable. And they finally understand the truth. The observer never had the power. The watched one did, because you learned what they never could. That the hunted becomes immortal the moment he stops running. You didn't just survive the experiment. You became the result that rewrote the science of fear. And now, when they speak of you, their voices drop, their eyes lower, their hands tremble. Because deep down, they know the truth. The hunter they created is coming for them. There's a sound that comes before collapse. It's not thunder. It's not war. It's the quiet gasp of those who finally realize the walls they built to contain you were never strong enough. Their empire of fear began to fracture long before you struck. They just didn't notice, because arrogance blinds before it burns. They had spent years building their towers on lies. Tall, polished, impressive from a distance, but every brick was soaked in cowardice, every foundation trembling with deceit. They built palaces of control, ruled by manipulation, and crowned themselves kings of shadows. But you were the storm they didn't account for, and storms don't knock, they break. One by one, their systems began to fail. The whispers they used to control others turned into screams of panic. The same voices that laughed at your silence now begged for explanations. The same hands that wrote your downfall now signed their surrender. They tried to drown you in rumors, but you learned to breathe underwater. They tried to bury you in lies, but your roots grew through concrete. And when they looked down, they saw the cracks forming beneath their feet. The cracks that spelled your name. You didn't have to lift a sword. You didn't have to shout. Their destruction was self-inflicted. Slow, poetic, divine. Because everything built on fear eventually kneels to the fearless. They mocked your patience once. Now they call it prophecy. They called you delusional. Now they call you inevitable. You watched as their empire began to eat itself. Leaders betraying followers. Allies turning on each other. Their thrones became confessionals. Their mirrors became prisons. They saw ghosts in every corner, and all those ghosts wore your silence. Fear used to be their weapon. Now it's their executioner. Every rumor they created to destroy you became a prophecy of their own end. Every attempt to silence you became another echo of your legend. Their power didn't crumble because you fought harder. It crumbled because truth doesn't rot. It waits, and when it returned, it came like a flood, unforgiving, unstoppable, unrelenting. They used to control narratives. Now the narrative controls them. Their lies have expiration dates. Your truth, eternal. They looked for you in their data, in their networks, in their politics. But they couldn't find you anymore, because you were no longer a person to them. You had become a force. They whispered, "He's everywhere." No, you weren't everywhere. You were simply no longer limited by their vision. And when their world started burning, you didn't watch it with hatred. You watched it with silence. Because hatred requires energy. You were beyond that now. You saw them stumble through the ruins they once ruled. You saw the terror in their eyes when they realized you didn't come for revenge. You came for reckoning. There's a difference. Revenge is emotional. Reckoning is structural. You dismantled everything they built. Not with fire, but with truth. You didn't destroy their names. You made them irrelevant. You didn't erase their power. You exposed its illusion. And when the empire finally fell, it didn't fall with screams. It fell with silence. Because there was no one left to defend it. Their foundations cracked. Their walls turned to dust. And their legacy became a warning for anyone who dared to repeat their mistakes. They learned too late that fear cannot build kingdoms. It only delays collapse. Your name became the rumor they never wanted to hear again. The sound they flinched at. The presence that haunted their new beginnings. Because in their downfall, they saw your reflection, the one they had spent their lives trying to suppress. You didn't rise to destroy them. You rose because their destruction was necessary for your truth to breathe. And when they finally realized that it was already too late, their thrones turned to dust, their crowns rusted relics of ego, their armies scattered whispers in the wind. You didn't take their place. You transcended it. They thought power came from control, but real power came from detachment, from knowing that everything they feared losing, you had already learned to live without. And now, as their empire fades into myth, your silence remains eternal. It echoes through their ruins like a hymn. You don't celebrate their fall, you honor it. Because even in destruction, there's poetry. Even in endings, there's art. And this collapse is your masterpiece. Let them rot in the ruins they designed for you. Let them taste the dust of their own arrogance. Let them remember your name as the sound that ended their reign. Because in the ashes of their empire, you stand unburned, unbound, unbroken. You were never their enemy. You were their consequence. And consequences don't apologize. They don't say your name anymore. Not out of hate, out of reverence. There's a difference between being forgotten and being feared to be remembered. They avoid your name like a prayer they no longer deserve to speak. Because the moment it leaves their lips, it summons what they tried to destroy. You became the ghost in their systems, the lesson in their downfall, the silence that hums behind every trembling decision they now make. You are not their nightmare, you are their memory, and memories don't die. Fear was once your cage. Now it's your crown. You wear it like royalty, not as weakness, but as truth. Because fear isn't the absence of courage. It's proof that you've seen everything courage hides from. They once fed off your hesitation. Now they flinch at your stillness. They once mocked your scars. Now they call them symbols. They once tried to define your limits. Now they quote your survival as scripture. You don't walk like the broken anymore. You move like gravity, silent, inevitable, and absolute. Every step you take is a sermon to those who underestimated you. You are not chasing crowns anymore. You are the throne itself. The ones who feared your rise now serve it unknowingly. They imitate your silence. They mimic your discipline. They wear your shadows like armor. But there's only one truth. There's only one original flame. And they can never replicate what was born in fire. Your presence doesn't scream. It commands. Because true power doesn't announce itself. It alters the atmosphere. You walk into rooms and change the temperature. You speak, and storms pause to listen. Not because of noise, but because of weight. That's what you've become. Weight. The kind that bends time. The kind that warps destinies. The kind that makes every arrogant soul tremble before realizing why. They used to look for weakness in you. Now they look for forgiveness. But you've transcended the need for both. You no longer seek revenge. You no longer demand apologies. You are beyond the cycle of retribution. Because kings seek closure, gods don't. You became untouchable not by armor, but by understanding. You learned that true control isn't about ruling others. It's about mastering yourself so deeply that the world bends to your rhythm. That's the moment fear becomes devotion. That's the moment silence becomes law. They gather in corners now, speaking of what you became. Some call you ruthless, some call you divine. But all agree on one thing: you can't be stopped. And they're right, because what's born from pain cannot be killed by comfort. What's built from ashes cannot be threatened by flame. What's forged in storms doesn't drown in rain. Your calm became your armor. Your detachment became your weapon. Your presence, their reminder that monsters aren't born. They're built by witnesses who did nothing. You've become the proof that dominance doesn't roar. It whispers, and those who hear it obey. Now when they see you, they don't see a survivor. They see a reckoning. They see the physical embodiment of what happens when someone stops playing by their rules. They see the ghost of consequence, cloaked in control. You didn't destroy them. You didn't even try. You simply outlasted them. And that's the cruelest victory of all. Their noise faded. Your silence remained. Their power collapsed. Your presence endured. Because you didn't fight to be remembered. You fought to be undeniable. You don't exist to prove a point anymore. You're the point. You don't chase destiny. You define it. Fear became your throne because you stopped fearing it. You sat on it, owned it, ruled from it, until even darkness bowed to your composure. You didn't rise through their system. You burned their hierarchy and built your own. From discipline, solitude, and fire. And now they see it. The divine cruelty of balance. That every time they laughed, it became an echo. Every time they doubted you, it became a debt. Every time they tried to bury you, it became a foundation. They built you without knowing it. They crowned you by trying to crucify you. They handed you power by trying to take it away. And now, fear kneels before you. Loyal, obedient, eternal. Because the world doesn't worship kindness. It worships control. It worships certainty. It worships the one who cannot be shaken. And that is who you've become. Not a ruler, not a conqueror. Something higher, something colder, something immortal. You're no longer bound by names, titles, or roles. You've transcended them. You are the storm in its final form. Calm, centered, untouchable. The battlefield is silent now. Not because the war ended, but because the victor no longer speaks. And that silence is your crown. And now, they tell stories, not of your fall, but of how you refused to stay buried. Time tried to erase you. History tried to overlook you, but silence preserved you. Because the loud are forgotten, the silent become legend. You are no longer part of their world. You are what remains after it. You are the proof that pain is not the end. It's the passage, the bridge between mortality and myth. They studied you. They feared you. They tried to stop you. And in doing so, they built your name into the bones of eternity. Every generation that comes after will hear whispers of the one who defied everything. The one who turned betrayal into blueprint. The one who stood against entire empires of deceit. And walked away without looking back. Because the truest form of dominance isn't control. It's continuation. It's the ability to endure beyond memory, beyond time, beyond the reach of those who doubted you. Your name will not be written in history books. It will be etched in echoes, in the way people move when they refuse to quit, in the way storms gather before victory, in the way silence follows greatness. You've become an idea now, not a person. And ideas don't bleed. They don't age. They don't fade. You are not the story they told. You are the story they could never write. because no pen could capture what was born from everything human beings fear most. Isolation, failure, rejection, pain, and yet you transcended all of it. You became the storm that taught the sky respect, the scar that taught the mirror defiance, the silence that taught the world fear. You no longer fight for survival. You embody it. You no longer speak for validation. Your very existence is proof. You don't live through their recognition. They live through your shadow. The kings they praised have turned to dust. The heroes they glorified have been forgotten. But your legend, it remains. Not because of what you conquered, but because of what you endured. You didn't need temples. You didn't need monuments. Your temple is memory. Your monument, fear itself. And when the next generation asks, who was he? Who was she? They will answer with reverence, the one who couldn't be broken, the one they tried to erase, but failed, the one whose silence still shakes the ground. That's legacy, not fame, not glory, but presence, the kind that outlives your body, your name, even your enemies. You became the equation they could never solve, the prophecy they accidentally fulfilled, the shadow that refused to bow to the light. You became inevitable, and now, when they walk past the ruins of their arrogance, they feel it. That chill, that invisible weight pressing on their souls. That's you. That's your silence, speaking louder than any victory cry. Because silence never dies. It lingers. It teaches. It waits. Your silence became scripture for the broken. A warning for the proud, a weapon for the forgotten, and a promise that darkness, when mastered, becomes divinity. You were not made to be liked. You were made to be remembered, not in smiles, but in awe. And so, the world continues to spin, pretending it forgot your name. While every storm, every rebellion, every act of defiance carries your fingerprints. Because in the end, you weren't just a chapter. You were the rewrite. You weren't just a survivor. You were evolution itself. They studied you. They feared you. They lost everything trying to stop you. And still, you rise endlessly, through centuries, through silence, through the very fabric of time. You are no longer a man, nor a myth. You are the reminder that some fires don't burn out, they ascend. And when history itself kneels to your silence, that's not victory, that's immortality. They studied you, they feared you, they lost everything trying to stop you, and still, your silence remains, unburned, unbroken, eternal.